For this particular tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to make a bag that fits a 9-inch zipper. So I'm going to take some measurements for you in case English is not your first language. So this is a 9-inch zipper, or about 23 centimeters. And the bag itself is about 6.5 inches and is about 11 inches wide by the time you're done with it. So the way that it's constructed is the back panel is actually a circle. And then once you make the circle, I go in the row from side to side with the herringbone stitch, and then we add the detail to the flap. So I have already made the back panel in my increases, and I'm going to leave a link below to show you how to do this. I didn't want this video to be too long, so I made them in separate videos. So once you finish 10 rounds of the circle in the video that I provide, you are going to want to meet back here. So I have a total of 10 stitches between every increase, so I'm on round 10. So once you've completed round 10, we are going to make a round of single crochet. We are going to put 1 single crochet in every stitch around. To refresh your memory, this is how you end and begin a round. So again, this beginning chain 1 will count as a stitch. So now I'm just going to put 1 single crochet in each stitch around using the waistcoat stitch. And again, this is round 11. So just continue making 1 single crochet in every stitch of this round until you reach where you started. So here we are where we began, and I'm going to show you how to actually end this. So you're just going to fasten off, and you're just going to pull it all the way through. And then we're going to skip over our beginning stitch there and put our hook from back to front. And then just grab the end there and pull it through to the back. And you'll have to look carefully. There's a back loop and a horizontal bar of the last stitch that we made. We're going to go through both of those loops right there and pull the tail through again to the back. And as you can see, it makes it look seamless. And now you're just going to weave that tail in really, really well since we did not make a knot. By now, your piece should measure about 8.5 inches, and that's very important because our zipper is 9 inches. If you're planning to add a zipper, it's very important. If you don't plan to add a zipper, you should be fine. Now I'm going to show you, this still has a slight shape of a hexagon based on where we put our increases. And so for what I'm about to instruct you to do, I want you to pay attention to round 10. We are going to add our stitch markers. You need 4 of them. And we are going to pay attention to these areas of increase in round 10. So here I am looking at round 10. Here's an area of increase and here's an area of increase. We are going to mark 10 stitches in between an increase. And we are going to be marking the sides of the bag. So looking right here, here's the area of an increase. You're just going to mark the stitch above it. So grab a stitch marker and mark the stitch directly above an increase. Now you're going to come down here and look for the next increase, which is right here. So you don't want to mark that stitch. You actually want to mark the stitch prior to the increase. So from this stitch marker to this stitch marker, including the stitches that are marked, you should have 10 stitches. Now, paying attention to round 10, you're going to find the next increase, and you're going to skip over the next increase to the next one. So right here's the next increase. You're going to mark the stitch above it. Now, paying attention to the next area of increase, find the next stitch of increase and move back a stitch and mark that stitch. And again, if you are counting the stitches in between these stitch markers, you should have 10. You should count the marked stitches when you are counting. So there should be 10 stitches on each side here that we have marked. This is going to be the side of the bag, and the leftover stitches will be the top and the bottom of the bag. So now that we have our sides marked, we are just simply going to take the right side and flip it over to where the wrong side is facing us. So you're going to pay attention to this marker on the bottom right. Find the marker on the bottom right. Take your hook and place it into the stitch directly above the marked stitch on the bottom right. Draw your yarn through. And now we are simply just going to make slip stitches going that way. You want to make your slip stitches sort of loose in this round because we are going to be working into them again. So don't make these slip stitches too tight. Be very loose with them. Now we have reached another stitch marker. I want you to take it out. Place your slip stitch in that stitch, and then take that marker and put it back in the slip stitch you just made. Now you're just going to continue on making slip stitches all the way around round 11, moving your stitch markers as you go. So here I have reached the stitch marker where we began, and I wanted to show you how to end it. So go ahead and take that stitch marker out and put a slip stitch in that stitch, and then replace the stitch marker into that stitch. Now we are where we began. We are going to actually put a slip stitch in that stitch there. And then, even though it seems redundant, I want you to slip stitch into the stitch that we started with. So now we are going to turn our piece and work in the row. I'm going to show you how to join the rows as you go so you don't have to sew it on later. So we are going to skip over those slip stitches there, and we are going to be working into the slip stitches that we just made and not into both layers there. So go to your marked stitch and make a single crochet. Take your stitch marker out and put it in the stitch you just made. And now working into those slip stitches, make one single crochet in each stitch across until you reach the other stitch marker. So here we are at the opposite side. Make sure you put a single crochet into that marked stitch. Take your stitch marker out and put it in the last stitch of the row. This is what your piece should look like. You should have a row of single crochet here. You should have 22 stitches. Now, since we created a row and we're joining it as we go, we are going to have to join this row to the piece. So we are just simply going to slip stitch into the next slip stitch. You kind of want to do it tightly because you don't want any gaps. And since we are working in the row, normally you would chain 1 and turn when you are normally working in the row, but you are not going to in this project. Since we are joining it as we go, you are simply going to make a slip stitch in the next slip stitch. This will count as your turning chain. So we have 1 slip stitch to join the row and 1 slip stitch to turn the row. So now we're going to skip over those slip stitches and work into the marked stitch. We are going to begin our half double herringbone stitch. Make 1 half double crochet in that first stitch. Take your stitch marker out and put it in the stitch you just made. For this stitch pattern, you need 2 half doubles, so we're going to make 1 more in the next stitch. And now that we have 2 half double crochet, we can begin our stitch pattern. So the half double herringbone actually works around the post, and then going backwards and forwards, we create the appearance of the herringbone stitch. So moving around that last post, we're going to go backwards. So put your hook into the stitch before that last post. Yarn over and pull up a loop to the height of the stitch. Moving to the next open stitch, you're going to yarn over and put your hook in that stitch. Pull up a loop to the height of the other stitches. You should have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through all 4 loops. Now we are going to be working around the post of this half double crochet, moving backwards and forwards. So go into the previous stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now just make a half double crochet in the next open stitch. You should have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through all 4 loops. I'm going to show you one more time. We're going to be working around the post of the last half double we made, moving backwards and forwards. So just continue in this fashion all the way across this last row until you reach the last stitch marker. So here I am at the last stitch of the row. I'm going to move backwards and forwards, making my last half double herringbone stitch. Put your stitch marker in that last stitch. And again, since we are joining it as we go, we created a row, so we need to join that row to the piece. You're simply going to slip stitch in the next stitch. Since we are going to continue on and make another row, slip stitch into the next stitch. This will count as your turning chain. Turn your piece. This is what your piece should look like. This is what the front should be looking like. Now we're going to continue on in our half double herringbone stitch. So moving to the marked stitch, we're going to skip over our slip stitches and begin our half double herringbone stitch pattern. Make a half double crochet in the very first stitch and move your marker to the stitch you just made. Make 1 more half double crochet. Now, working around the post of the last half double we created, you're going to work backwards and forwards and begin the half double herringbone stitch pattern. Moving around the post of the last half double we made, moving backwards and forwards. Continue on in the stitch pattern. So you're just going to continue in this fashion, making the half double herringbone stitches all the way across until you reach the last stitch marker. Here we are at the last stitch. I'm making my very last stitch of the row. You're going to take that stitch marker out and put it in the last stitch you just made. Since we created a row, we need to join the row, and to do that, we're just going to slip stitch in the next stitch. And now we're going to slip stitch because we're going to go on to the next row. And again, this counts as our turning chain. So this is what your piece should look like now with 2 rows of half double herringbone. We're just going to continue doing this over and over. I'm going to show you one more time how to begin. So starting in the marked stitch, you're going to make a half double crochet. Mark that stitch. Make another half double crochet in the next stitch and begin making your half double herringbone stitch pattern. So you're just going to continue doing this over and over. When you finish this row, you will slip stitch to join in the next stitch, and then before you turn, you're going to slip stitch again. And you're just going to continue making rows of half double herringbone until you reach the next set of stitch markers up here at the top. So when you are done, you should be ending on this stitch marker to the left. And when you have completed that, I will meet you back here. So here I have completed the front panel. And you should have 8 rows of half double herringbone plus your row of single crochet. So you should have a total of 9 rows completed. You should have already worked into that stitch marker on the right, and now we are to the stitch marker on the left. I'm going to work my last stitch of the row. And now, normally you would slip stitch to join this row, but we're not going to. We're going to just go ahead and start working on the top flap. So we're going to be working in that direction. So you are just going to single crochet directly into that marked stitch. We are not going to slip stitch to join. Just go ahead and single crochet. Now, so you don't lose your spot, go ahead and mark that stitch that you just made. So take that stitch marker out and put it in the stitch you just made. Now, working through these slip stitches in the top flap, you are going to single crochet in every stitch across until you reach the other stitch marker. So here I am, I've reached the other stitch marker. I wanted to show you that you still need to make a single crochet into that stitch, and you need to move the marker into the stitch you just made. To make it look even, we are going to slip stitch into the last stitch of the row here. So go ahead and take that other stitch marker out, and we're going to turn and make one more row along the top flap. So you're just going to skip over the marked stitch. We are going to decrease in this row, so skip over the marked stitch and slip stitch into the next stitch. So slip stitch into that stitch and chain 1. Now we're going to begin our half double herringbone stitch pattern, so make a half double crochet in the same stitch and in the next stitch. And begin the stitch pattern moving backwards and forwards. And you're just going to continue making this stitch pattern all the way across the top flap until you reach the opposite side. So here we are, I've reached the last stitch marker, and you are just going to ignore that stitch. You are not going to work into that stitch. So we decreased on each side, Now here at this point, you need to decide if you're going to add a zipper or if you're going to add a button. So I have a video that you can watch on how to add a zipper, and I will link it in the description box below. You will need a 9-inch zipper if you've made it this size. But I'm going to show you how to add a button in case you're not comfortable adding a zipper. So chain 1 and turn. Now you are simply going to slip stitch until you reach the center of the top flap, which if you have the same stitch count should be 10 stitches. So slip stitch into the very first 10 stitches. Once you have done that, you have got to decide if you are going to be using a large button or a bead or whatever you're going to be using. That is going to affect the number that I tell you to chain. So I'm going to be using this 25mm bead, and I'm just going to be making a loop big enough to go around that. But if you are using a bigger button, you are going to need to chain more. So I'm going to chain 5 because that will go around my button. And then I'm just going to slip stitch in the last 10 stitches. This is what your piece should look like. And now we are just simply going to fasten off. So now you're just going to weave these ends really well and sew a button to the front, of course. But before we do that, I'm going to show you how to add a tassel to the button loop. So I just use my fingers, and if you were going to use a piece of cardboard, it's probably about 4 to 5 inches wide. And I'm just wrapping my fingers about 7 times. Cut the bottoms to create tassel tails. And then grab your hook and going through the buttonhole, grab one end of all of the tails and pull it through. And then you're simply just going to fold them in half to where they're about the same length. And we are going to secure these tails using the gathering knot. So I cut a piece of yarn about 6 inches long, create a loop across the area that you're going to be wrapping, and just below the buttonhole, I'm going to wrap it until I feel comfortable with how secure it is. Once you're satisfied, take the loop and take that tail through that loop, hold it down and pull up on the top end. This is going to create a knot, and then just pull it underneath the area that you wrapped and cut it to the quick. And now you're just going to cut your tails evenly. So that's what it should look like, and we're going to add our button now. And I'm just going to sew it on. You don't need to watch me. So this is the finished product. I have stuffed the bag so that you can see what it will look like with items in the bag. And again, if you want to add a zipper, I will link it in the description box. It's really not that hard, and it does look a little more professional. But this doesn't look bad, and it would save you time. I'm also going to link a video and show you how to make the strap to match, and also how to add the D-rings. And I will link it in the description box below, so be sure to check that out if you want a matching strap. And that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial today. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.